In the heart of the tropical paradise known as Key West, Florida, there lies a unique and storied place that echoes with the whispers of history and the secrets of those who have long departed this world. This place is the Key West Cemetery, where the living and dead coexist in a peculiar harmony beneath the relentless sun and swaying palm trees. Established here in 1847, after a hurricane hit the island in 1846, washing up the previous cemetery that was close towards the West Martello Towers. The effects of the hurricane were terrible. Bodies were washed up out of the graves and scattered throughout the forest, some even getting lodged in the trees, and caskets were seen floating down Duval Street. That's when the people of Key West knew they needed to choose an area further inland and at the highest spot of the island. It is here that they purchased the first 100-lot tract in the center of the town. Because this was the time of the rural cemetery movement, the cemetery was created to be a large park-like area. These kind of landscaped cemeteries came about as a response to the overcrowded private and churchyard cemeteries of the time. The cemeteries became parks where works of art and beautiful landscape grounds could be enjoyed. Families would go and have lunch with their relatives living or deceased. Many of the monuments marking the graves of the wealthy and prominent citizens here were shipped to the island, while the locally produced grave markers are made of brick, cement, or tile. On some of them, you'll see symbols providing insight into the person's career, their family, life, participation in the community, or just personal sentiments. The cemetery is now a sprawling 19 acres with over 70,000 people buried here, according to the city. And as of the July 1st, 2022 census, the population of Key West was 25,597. It's no wonder Key West is said to be so haunted. Just look at the numbers. The dead outnumber the living by a lot. Definitely want to be here if there's a zombie apocalypse, you know? Now you'll notice as we ride through the cemetery, there's a lot of white concrete rectangular boxes. Here, the people are buried above ground due to the high water level and the lack of availability down below. Also, something else you'll notice, a lot of iguanas. They really love the cemetery. Now, Key West Cemetery has its own ghost and its own little stories and history, just like every cemetery does. So, let's start off with a little bit of weird history. And let me tell you the story about a man who slept with a corpse for 7 years. It's April 22nd, 1930. 20-year-old Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, Elena to friends, had been referred to the Marine Hospital in Key West for testing due to a severe cough. Here, she meets 53-year-old radiologist Carl Tanzler von Kossel, 5'3", 40-looking man who thought very highly of himself. And when Carl met Elena, he was struck by Cupid's arrow, because she was his soulmate. See, back when Carl was younger, he said that he would have visitations from the spirit of his supposed dead ancestor, Countess Anna von Constantia von Kossel, and during those visitations, she revealed to him the face of his true love. A dark-haired, exotic woman, and that's exactly who he was looking at. After her test, it was revealed that she had tuberculosis, a death sentence at that time. But this didn't stop Carl in his pursuit of his soulmate. He was able to convince Elena's family to let him try and cure her, as they were tight for money and he was offering to do it for free. He concocted potions and tonics containing gold and would have her drink those, then connect her to electrodes and give her shock treatments. He called it giving medicinal wines. Whatever. During his treatments, he began showering her with gifts, professing his love for her and eventually proposing marriage. She would tell him no, but he persisted. And each time, she would tell him she didn't love him and considered him more of a grandfather, and besides, she was still legally married. What? On February 18, 1926, at the age of 16, Elena married Luis Mesa, and they were expecting their first child. Unfortunately, she miscarried and then fell ill with a cough shortly after. And I guess Mesa couldn't handle it because he moved his butt back to Miami, leaving her behind. What an ass. Well, guess what? Carl was married too, with 2 children. You see, in 1926, he immigrated from Germany to Zephyr Hills, Florida, where his sister had immigrated earlier. He was joined by his wife and children later on. Then in 1927, he took a radiology job at the Marine base here in Key West, leaving them behind, never to mention them. In an interview given by Elena's sister Nana to the Miami Herald, she said,
Elena never loved Tanzler. She was only nice to him because my mother told her she should be kind to those who are kind to her. She looked upon Von Kossel as a grandfather, and when he proposed marriage, she always told him,
"You are too old. Why, you are old enough to be my grandfather. What's more, I do not love you."
He became so persistent that we had to ask him to stay away from the house.
Now, Elena's parents had instructed Carl to stay away. They were tired of his proposals and his unorthodox devil machines, as they called them. But he persisted. And eventually they got tired of him and couldn't deal with it anymore, and would move without telling him. This distraught Carl so much that he walked the streets day and night looking for them, until a neighbor felt sorry for him and told him where they were. By this time, her condition had worsened, and they allowed him back in without any hesitations. And of course, the weird treatments and proposals of marriage started all over again, creating much animosity between him and the family. But he would do anything to save her and be with her. And he showed this to the family when one night her heart stopped and she was gone. But Carl wasn't giving up. He brought her back with electroshock. But unfortunately for her, this was not the only time it happened. After the second time, Elena told her parents that the ordeal was so painful that every time he brought her back, it just hurt. And she begged them to not tell him next time until she was too far gone. She just couldn't take it anymore. And on October 25th, 1931, Elena finally got her wish and died at the age of 22. In Carl's memoirs, he wrote,
"In my desperation, I called out to Elena's brother-in-law, 'If only you had come to me half an hour earlier. Perhaps it wouldn't have been too late.' He lost time trying to get all doctors in town, and none of them were at home. Her father had driven home at breakneck speed instead of driving to the nearby hospital, where we doctors might have saved her life."
He signed her death certificate and listed the cause of death as expiration from a series of violent seizures clinically associated with dormant epilepsy. Man, talk about not giving up. God, he was persistent. Well, Carl was heartbroken at this time, and he wants to make sure that she's buried in the best. He insists on paying for the cost of everything, and he builds her a beautiful mausoleum that looks just like a little home, with a door in front. And he has a plaque made. But before she's buried, Earl also has a death mask made. Instructs that her casket is airtight with an incubator tank full of formaldehyde to prevent decay. He also instructs that the mausoleum was to be equipped with lighting, electricity, and a telephone line to her grave. Whatever. That's definitely some odd behavior, but, to each his own. Carl spent the next 2 years visiting Elena nightly, bringing her gifts, sitting and singing to her, and he would even say that she, or her spirit, would sometimes routinely pop up to see what was going on and to sing with him. Oh, they're so cute. And then all of a sudden the visit stopped, and no one thought anything of it. That definitely wasn't a happy ending. But wait, there's more. Buckle up, buttercups, because shit's about to get weird. You see, 7 years later in 1940, people began talking about Carl's odd behavior. Neighbors were noticing that he was routinely buying women's clothing and a lot of perfume. Those who remembered him going to the mausoleum all of a sudden started wondering why he'd stopped. And then one day, a little boy was walking down the street and said that he could see into Carl's living room and saw him dancing with what looked like a giant doll. These rumors got back to Elena's sister Florinda, or Nana, and it made her mind begin to wander. So, her and her husband decided to pay Carl a visit. And when Carl answered the door, he said, "Elena, your sister is here," and ushered them in. When she looked in his bedroom, she saw what looked like her sister's body laying in his bed. When confronted, Carl admitted it was in fact Elena. The authorities were immediately notified, and he was promptly arrested for wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. Carl was examined by a psychiatrist and declared sane and held accountable for his actions. Unfortunately, though, due to the statutes of limitations regarding such matters, he was released. And on his way out, he had the audacity to ask for Elena's body back. He felt he was entitled to her as he had just spent the past 7 years taking care of her. But luckily there were some good people there and they told him, no. Now the story made headlines and many people actually felt sympathy for Carl. They considered him to be a hopeless romantic, if not a tad eccentric. So, what happened, though, during those 7 years between the time that he stopped visiting Elena in the mausoleum and the time Nana found her in his home? It began one evening in April of 1933. Carl had arrived at the cemetery with a toy wagon. His plan? To take Elena home with him. It seems that her body was no longer able to stay within the casket as it was beginning to deteriorate, and Lena had come and told him that she wished he would take her away. So, that's what he was going to do. And he had no problems retrieving her body, as he had the only key to the mausoleum so that no one else could get her. He placed her in the wagon and took her back to his place. Once at home, he began the restoration process that lasted for 7 years. He used piano wire to keep her tied together, wire coat hangers to help prop her joints up, and silk cloth dipped in wax and plaster of Paris to help replace her rotting skin as it fell off throughout the years. He replaced her eyes with glass eyes and stuffed her body with rags to help keep her shape. He had a wig made from her real hair, which he had gotten from her mother, and stapled that to her head. He then dressed her in women's clothing and jewelry and would use huge amounts of perfume, disinfectants, and deodorizers to cover up the smell of decomposition. Most of the time, the body stayed in his bed, but once in a while they would have dinner together and, I guess, go dancing. And they lived like this for 7 years. Don't think the restoration stopped there. After her body was discovered, an autopsy was performed. And it was during the autopsy that a tube was discovered in her vaginal area, leading one to believe that Carl consummated their union, if you know what I mean. That's pretty friggin' gross. He said he didn't, but I don't know. And then to further disgrace her body, the funeral home put her on display after the autopsy and charged 10 cents a person. Over 8,000 people lined up to get a look at this corpse bride, and even the local schools let out early so children could go and see her. What the hell? Imagine that. He comes on, Mom, I got out early because we're going to go see the corpse bride. What? It's a lady who's been dead for 7 years, but this man kept her alive with wax and everything and all that, and now they got her body out for everybody to see. What? Afterwards, she was buried in an unmarked grave. And in one article I read, they said that they had cut her body up into 3 pieces and buried her in different spots in the cemetery. Either way, it was an unmarked area, and it was done so that Carl could not come and retrieve her body again. And this upset Carl a lot. To show his displeasure, he blew up the mausoleum before he left town. The only thing that remains now is the plaque that he had made, and that hangs in the Fort East Martello Museum. He moved back to Zephyr Hills, Florida, and lived close to his wife, Doris, who apparently helped him in his last years of life. And upon searching his lab, they found a homemade spaceship outside that Carl had named Elena's airship. Here is where most of the restoration took place. And Carl had plans to fly her high into the stratosphere so that the radiation from outer space could penetrate her tissues and restore life to her somnolent form. Wow, he seriously thought that. Anyhow, he died July 3rd, 1952 at the age of 75. 3 weeks after his death, his body was discovered on the floor of his home with a life-size effigy of Elena wearing the death mask next to him. Wow, so how's that for a story? Crazy, huh? I know, but it's true. Look it up. Now, since we're in the cemetery, of course, we're going to talk about the ghosts that frequent here. I, unfortunately, did not get to meet these spirits, but tour groups, staff members, and other visitors have reported seeing the ghost of a Bohemian woman during the day and night floating around the ground. It seems that she gets a little upset if she is seen, but she gets even more upset if she sees you being disrespectful to the graves. And that means by walking on them or sitting on the tombstones. Psychics have visited the grave that she hangs around, and they say that she is very angry and is looking for someone, although they don't know who or why. Another little spirit is that of a little girl that people have heard calling out to them, and as they follow her voice, they eventually end up at the foot of the little girl's headstone. They don't feel threatened or scared in any way, and many people believe that perhaps it's just a little spirit who would like to play some hide and seek. More in the know fact. Something else the cemetery is famous for is its epitaphs on some of the headstones. Some of them are a bit humorous, such as the headstone of a woman named B.P. Pearl Roberts. She says, "I told you I was sick." It seems that she was a bit of a hypochondriac, and doctors were never able to find anything wrong with her. But either something was wrong or I don't know. Anyhow, another tombstone reads, I always dreamed of owning a small place in Key West. Another one? If you're reading this, you desperately need a hobby. Yeah, some of us do. And how about this? I'm just resting my eyes. I've got someone in my family that is like that. Well, anyhow, that's a small bit of the weird and unusual that the cemetery has to offer. Keep an eye out for part 2, where we look at some of the famous locals buried here.